What's good? It's Wood. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. This is actually an addendum of sorts. It's an update on a video that I just dropped previewing the UFC 263 third fight. Not the main event, not the co-main, but Leon Edwards versus Nate Diaz. And in that preview, I pretty much went through, kind of speed through the career of both guys and then analyzed the matchup. But in doing so, I mistakenly gave the analysis under the premise that this was to be a 3-rounder, when in fact, this is the first non-main, non-co-main event 5-rounder in UFC history. So this, even though it's not a title fight, even though it's not a main event or co-main, this is actually going to be a 5-rounder, which changes a lot in my book, because I picked Leon Edwards to win this via decision, 2-1 or 3-0, because he's a fast starter and Diaz's tendency to kind of come on strong as the minutes start ticking, and then it becomes more a battle of attrition that it wouldn't work for Diaz in the same way, especially here at 170, where his longer dimensions that were such an advantage at 155 don't have the same impact as the 170 guys are significantly bigger. So right now, for instance, Edwards and Diaz are the same height. Diaz has a slight reach advantage, but not to the same degree as when he was fighting those 155 guys. This is a 76-inch to 74-inch reach contrast. So now that I understand this to be a 5-rounder, I still think that Leon Edwards is going to get off to the stronger start. I think that he's the more technically sound boxer. He's a southpaw, and I think early in fights, you can look at the first round between Diaz and Jorge Masvidal in that BMF match. You could look at both his first and second fights against Conor McGregor. Nate Diaz can get kind of chipped up in the first round, and I think that that is likely to be the case here as well. And Nate Diaz also has a tendency to cut his, over his eyebrows. There's a lot of scar tissue. I think that those factors would still come into play even with this being a 5-rounder, not a 3. But where I see the difference is if Leon Edwards isn't able to keep things at boxing range and kind of keep things at a measured pace. He's not a super high volume guy. The more boring Leon Edwards can make this fight, the better it is for him. He doesn't want this to become a brawl, a slugfest. So, if I look at the Leon Edwards versus the RDA, Rafael Dos Anjos fight, for instance, Leon Edwards got to a, 3-0 lead. And as RDA tried to battle back in the 4th and the 5th, you saw that a lot of what was working for Edwards early in the fight weren't the same tactics that he was using late. I mean, there's certain things that he's always accustomed to doing. For instance, and both him and Nate Diaz do this pretty well. But in the clinch, they both tend to throw some well-timed, vicious elbows out of the clinch, like on the break. You'll see Leon Edwards do that a lot. And I'm sure that he's going to look to take advantage of that against Diaz here to hopefully open up a cut or something. But what I think is kind of being slept on, because the idea is that if we extend this to a 5-rounder, that Leon Edwards will be the one that's more likely to fade as Nate Diaz starts to use more of his battle of attrition attributes, volume punching, pressure, and that those things are going to start playing into his advantage. Now, I think that what's kind of being missed there is that Leon Edwards is not a weak guy, just bodily wise. No, he's not Kamaru Usman, which is why Kamaru Usman was able to largely pummel him in their first fight several years back, early in both of their UFC careers. But Leon Edwards does have formidable strength. And by that I mean, if him and Diaz, for instance, get, locked up in a clinch, I think that it would be Edwards that's turning Diaz's body and pushing him into the cage, as opposed to Diaz kind of not manhandling, but getting the better of Edwards in the grapple in the same way that Diaz did against Showtime Pettis when he returned to the cage after a 3-year absence after that second fight with Conor. Yeah, Nate Diaz took 3 years off in his absolute commercial prime and then came back and fought up at 170, even though those Conor fights were at 170. Conor's not a 170 fighter. Neither was Showtime Pettis. So when you look at Nate Diaz's selection in opponents at 170, except for his latest fight against Jorge Masvidal, somebody who, yeah, once fought at 155, well, once upon a time at least, several fights, but a long time ago, but he's acclimated more so into 170 than Conor McGregor or Showtime Pettis have. Now, earlier in Nate Diaz's career, when he went up to and lost to like Rory McDonald and Don Hyun Kim after beating Rory Markham and Marcus Davis, he actually split in his first foray at 170, 2-2 at 170. That was, again, several years back. And then even more recently, he's gone another 2-2 at 170. So he's actually 4-4 in his career at 170. And if you look at the guys that he's beaten, again, recently, Conor McGregor, Showtime Pettis, not true 170 guys, but he totally outstrengthed and outgrappled Anthony Pettis when he returned after that 3-year absence. And Leon Edwards, right now in his career, isn't Anthony Pettis as we now see him. Pettis has lost 9 of his last 15 fights, and again, he's not a 170 guy. So Nate Diaz kind of getting the better of him in the grapple, I don't expect to be the case with him versus Leon Edwards. In fact, if anybody's going to be doing the takedowns, I believe in the first, at least in the first couple to 3 rounds, I think that it's more likely that Leon Edwards gets the better of the grapple and can take a round or 2 through as much grappling as striking. So I wouldn't be surprised if Leon Edwards wins one of the first 3 rounds mostly through the stand-up and another round primarily through grappling. So the question is, because I do think that this is going to get out of the second round. I don't expect Leon Edwards to knock Nate Diaz out or submit him in the first 2 rounds. If he does stop Diaz, that would be a huge statement, and it would be just what Leon Edwards needs to propel his name. Because if you think about it, him and Diaz are a little bit opposite in this regard, at least at this point. Leon Edwards is kind of like a very successful but not highly touted reputation and notoriety-wise, whereas Nate Diaz, you could look at his work over the past few years, he's been largely inactive and has been kind of a win-some, lose-some guy. I mean, you could look at his, 20-12 record and kind of get that. But name recognition-wise, he's about as big as it gets in the UFC. Again, wildly popular. But again, I don't expect Leon Edwards to finish Nate Diaz in the first couple rounds, and same thing with Nate Diaz finishing Leon. I expect this to go into the 3rd and probably even the 4th round. And so when it gets to that point, is it going to be the pressure of Nate Diaz that wins the day? Or will Leon Edwards have done enough damage to a 36-year-old Nate Diaz to where Leon Edwards' physical strength in those championship rounds, if you will, the 4th and the 5th, are still going to be enough to hold Nate Diaz off to where Nate Diaz doesn't, win the 4th and 5th round, to where if 1 or 2 judges give Nate Diaz one of the first 3 rounds, that Nate Diaz could then win a 3-2 decision. So this one is actually tougher to call than if this was a 3-rounder. I felt very comfortable in saying, yeah, Leon Edwards should take at least 2 out of the 3 rounds in a 3-rounder against Nate Diaz. But here, I'm actually still going to go with Leon Edwards. But I think that it's more likely to be a split decision, 3-2 type of fight. I do think that Nate Diaz is going to win at least one of the last 2 rounds. And I think that it's very possible that he gets at least one of the first 3 rounds. I don't think it's going to be the same 3-0 that I had Jorge Masvidal beating Nate Diaz in that BMF fight in November of 2019, Nate Diaz's last fight to date. So again, I'm factoring in some inactivity here, which might be able to do, or might do, a long in the tooth fighter who's had a ton of wars throughout his career. It might actually do certain fighters some good to sporadically return and not just stay on this treadmill of one fight after the next, after the next. But I do think that Leon Edwards is adequate enough of a grappler to where I don't expect Nate Diaz to just have his way with Edwards. But I do think that Edwards will be a lot less sharp and will start fatiguing in the second, third, and then even more so in the championship round. So I am going Leon Edwards via decision still. But instead of 2 rounds to 1 or 3 rounds to 0, I think it's going to be more like split decision-ish, 3 rounds to 2, maybe 4 rounds to 1 on a judge's scorecard. So yeah, let me know what you think about this fight and how much different of a fight do you think that it is being a 5-rounder, versus a 3-rounder. My bad on that last video. I totally dropped the ball on that one. I came into this one thinking that it was a 3-rounder, but yeah, UFC kind of made history here, having a non-co-main, non-main fight be a 5-rounder, and I think that that's largely because this was initially supposed to be a co-main on a previous card. It was postponed, so a couple months later, here we are. Let me know what you think about this fight. Please leave your comments in the comments, like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.